Today at 6, as the number of dead heads for 40,000, more aid is promised for the survivors of last week's earthquakes. In Syria, some aid is starting to flow through a new route from Turkey. Until today, only this border crossing had been open.
Will this be enough to help the millions who are now thought to be homeless? And second, if this had happened earlier, could more lives have been saved?
Yes, we'll have the latest from our correspondent Laura Bicker on the humanitarian disaster that's been growing by the day. Also on the programme, Ford announces the loss of 1,300 jobs in the UK, most of them in Essex, with thousands more in the EU. In the case of the policeman who murdered Sarah Everard, 2 officers will be investigated over their handling of reports of indecent exposure by Wayne Couzens. The Welsh Government announces it is scrapping the majority of new road-building schemes to protect the environment.
In February, the BBC starts a new television service, BBC Wales.
And it's been 100 years of the BBC in Wales. We'll be looking back and we'll be looking forward.
And coming up on the BBC News channel, Liverpool say action must be taken to ensure there are no more near misses as UEFA takes responsibility for the dangerous scenes at last season's Champions League final.
A very good evening and welcome to BBC News at 6, which comes today from the Welsh capital. We're in Cardiff in a week when the BBC is celebrating a century of broadcasting in Wales. We'll have a little bit about more that later on. We're going to start, though, with our main story today, which is the devastation in southern Turkey and northern Syria, where the number of dead after last week's earthquakes is now heading for 40,000. With millions left without shelter, in freezing conditions, with little food and poor sanitation. Now, northern Syria is vulnerable. It's particularly difficult to reach because of the complex political situation there after years of conflict. Control of the northern border is split between the Syrian government and rebel groups. But President Assad of Syria has now approved the use of 2 new border crossings at Bab el Salameh and Al-Rai, so more deliveries can come in from the UN especially. A convoy crossed through Bab el Salameh this afternoon. Until today, aid has been routed through one single crossing point at Bab al-Hawa, with lots of pressure, as you can imagine, on that point of access. Our correspondent Laura Bicker has been there and sent this report.
Every day in Antakya, relatives huddle around piles of rubble that were once family homes, waiting for news. But rescue efforts have slowly become recovery missions, and now as workers comb through bricks and dust, the hope is of finding a body to say a final farewell. There are some who are still defying the odds. After more than 200 hours, 2 women were pulled from deep within the ruins. At least 3 others were rescued in other parts of Turkey, but there are fewer miracle moments each day. And for survivors living in fractured cities where damaged buildings are still collapsing, and surviving in freezing temperatures with no heating, little water and food is becoming more difficult.
They're asking for wet wipes, soaps, shampoos. There's water, but there's nowhere to take a shower. People are struggling.
The government says it's doing all it can to support survivors.
The fact it happened near the surface caused a destructive multiplier effect. The 2 earthquakes released an energy as big as atomic bombs.
The wait for aid has been longer in Syria, but more is now on its way.
Until today, this was the only route available for aid to get through to Syria. But the United Nations has now organised 2 other border crossings. But it leaves key questions. First, will this be enough to help the millions who are now thought to be homeless? And second, if this had happened earlier, could more lives have been saved?
The search for survivors in Idlib is over. The living are now focused on staying warm and alive.
I've lost everything around me. I lost everyone I know in the 3 buildings that used to be next to me. I lost my neighbours and my children's 7 friends in the building next to us. We lost a large number of people who used to live near us. My neighbours, my friends, colleagues and partners.
This has been one of the world's deadliest earthquakes, but without urgent help, this disaster could claim even more lives. Laura Bicker, BBC News in Antakya.
The latest there on all the efforts being made with Laura Bicker, our correspondent. To find out much more, of course, on the earthquakes which happened last week and the devastating impact, you can go to BBC News Online, bbc.co.uk/news, or, of course, you can use the BBC News app. Back home now, and official figures show that pay has grown at its fastest rate for more than 20 years, but it is still failing to keep up with rising prices. The Office for National Statistics says that average wages rose by more than 6.5% between October and December, as employers came under increasing pressure to respond to the rising cost of living. Now, the latest figures also showed close to record low levels of unemployment. Our business editor, Simon Jack, explains a little more.
Thank you.
Could the answer to looking after the under 5s be found in the over 50s? This nursery in South London, like other businesses, is finding it harder post-Brexit and post-pandemic to find staff. It's turning to older workers to fill the gaps and is waiting for 7 workers over 50 to join.
We've seen people come out of kind of semi-retirement and join us. So people that have either got time on their hands or need to earn a bit of extra cash. And they've seen this as a flexible option to come back into the workplace and use life skills as well as maybe prior relevant experience. So for us, that's a great pool of people.
There are 3.5 million people between 50 and 64 economically inactive. That means not looking for a job. That's a fall of 56,000 over the last 3 months. And the demand for workers also fell slightly, with the number of vacancies down 76,000, but there are still 1.1 million unfilled jobs. The government wants to see more over 50s back at work.
We've got quite a long way to go to get back to where we were pre-pandemic. In fact, we'd need to see those figures go down by about another 500,000 to get back to that point. So there's a huge amount of work to be done, but there are some encouraging signs at least, and they are early signs, but encouraging signs over the last quarter that those figures are beginning to come down.
We still have millions of working age people who are not actively looking for a job, either because they're in education, they are unable to, maybe they're too unwell to look for a job. And that means employers have to compete for the ones that are looking for a job, pushing wages up, which in turn pushes inflation up, which then makes people ask for higher wages. And it's that wage spiral that the Bank of England is so afraid of.
Employers are going.
Demand for workers is still outstripping supply, but falling vacancies show some employers remain cautious.
2022 was a difficult year, having started out very optimistically. So I would say employers are looking to stabilise the situation, try and get through the first half of 2023. Hopefully inflation stabilises and vacancies will start to grow again as the year progresses.
Private sector employers may be scaling back hiring on economic uncertainty, but that's not an option for the public sector, who can't treat or teach fewer people and whose wages are lagging well behind both the private sector and inflation, a major reason behind recent strikes. Simon Jack, BBC News.
The vehicle manufacturer Ford has announced that it is cutting around 1/5 of its workforce in the UK. 1,300 jobs are to go, most of them from the company's technical centre at Dunton in Essex. It's part of a major restructuring which will see 3,800 jobs going in Europe, including more than 2,000 of them in Germany. Our employment correspondent, Zoe Conway, has been looking at the details.
They don't make cars here at the Ford campus in Dunton in Essex. They research and develop Ford's cars of the future. But now 1,000 of the engineers and designers who work here are losing their jobs. Ford might be shrinking here, but it's expanding in the United States, investing $3.7 billion in electric car assembly, which is just over £3 billion. The US government is offering billions of dollars in subsidies to car makers who create electric vehicle supply chains in America. The European Union is considering doing something similar. So what about the UK?
The UK government needs to be doing a lot more to support the building of an electric vehicle supply chain in the UK, including things like making batteries, and having some sort of industrial strategy to help the UK auto industry make that transition to an electric future.
The government insists the UK is a leader in green technology and says it's making major investments in the auto industry. However, car production in the UK is now at its lowest level for 66 years. Zoe Conway, BBC News.
The police watchdog has decided that 2 officers should be investigated over their failure to check allegations of indecent exposure against Wayne Couzens, the former policeman who pleaded guilty yesterday to 3 counts of indecent exposure. One of the offences took place just 4 days before Couzens kidnapped and murdered Sarah Everard in 2021. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning is at Newscaster. Lucy, tell us more about today's events.
Well, let's be clear what this is. Allegations that 2 police officers did not do their jobs properly, did not discover that Wayne Couzens, a fellow police officer, was also a sex offender. And if they had done their jobs properly, then possibly, likely, he wouldn't have gone on to murder Sarah Everard. We have a Met police officer under investigation for gross misconduct. That officer was handed the car registration details when Wayne Couzens exposed himself just days before Sarah's murder at a McDonald's drive-in. Amazingly, that officer under investigation resigned from the Met last year. So even if that gross misconduct is proven, nothing's going to happen. The other officer being investigated is from Kent Police. That was for an incident that happened in 2015. Someone was reported in a car to have exposed themselves. That car was registered to Wayne Couzens, but the officer from Kent never discovered that it was a police officer, never even interviewed him. What's clear is that these indecent exposures are now being thoroughly investigated, and it's just an absolute devastating shame that they weren't investigated properly at the time that they took place, in the years and the days before Sarah Everard was killed. And it left Wayne Couzens with his police warrant card, his police officer status, to go and rape and murder.
Lucy, thank you very much again for the latest there at New Scotland Yard. Lucy Manning, our special correspondent. The time is just about 13 minutes past 6. Our main story this evening: desperately needed earthquake relief is reaching Syria, with some aid starting to flow through a new route from Turkey. Until today, only this border crossing had been open.
This afternoon, the Princess Margaret opened the BBC's new headquarters in Wales, Broadcasting House, Llandaff.
And coming up, 100 years of the BBC's presence in Wales. We'll have a flavour of the role that it's played in national life.
Coming up on Sports Day on the BBC News Channel, we'll be live at the San Siro Stadium as Tottenham prepare for the first leg of their Champions League knockout tie against AC Milan.
Now, here in Wales, the Welsh Government has announced that it is scrapping the majority of new road building projects because of the potential harm to the environment. Let's take a look at the current major road network right across Wales. Now, in 2021, the Welsh Government announced that all new road building projects were being put on hold. Today, a review of 59 new roads has given the go-ahead to only 15 projects. The remainder have been rejected, or they'll need to be fully revised. And in future, all new routes will need to show that they can reduce carbon emissions. Our Wales correspondent, Huw Edwards, has more details.
The green fields of Flintshire, where for 14 years plans for a new A road have been up in the air.
Just the impact on the whole landscape as well. It would have completely changed it, and forever, wouldn't it?
Never the same again.
Today, finally for these campaigners, the news they'd hoped for. The so-called red route here won't go ahead as planned, along with most new road projects in Wales. For Jenny, it's a huge relief.
It's been like a massive cloud. And you get up every morning, I look across the fields, look at our beautiful views. OK, we don't own a view, but having said that, nature owns it. Humans don't, nature does. And that's why we should be protecting nature.
All new road projects in Wales were stalled 2 years ago to review their environmental impact, carbon emissions considered alongside economic costs. This ancient woodland, home to bats, badgers, barn owls and otters, won't then have a dual carriageway cutting right through it. But some feel that road could have been a lifeline.
We are receiving goods from Mexico, all over America and obviously Europe.
So you're global? Aska's company exports around the world. They repair the telecoms kit that keeps us all connected. But he says stopping the new road here could cut off investment and rolls back on promises made by the Welsh Labour government.
They are not pragmatic and they cannot be trusted. That's the key thing. And they've got to, they'll suffer for it, but their reputation will be badly damaged. At the moment, we have got an emergency hitting our communities, our residents, our small businesses.
Ministers say the climate emergency takes precedence, but investment will come in public transport.
We don't want to stop people driving by car, but we want to make sure they have a choice. Because at the moment, people don't feel they have a choice. They feel they have to have a car. And in the poorest of households...
So we've failed so far to put that public transport in?
We have not invested enough for generations in public transport. You look at the continent, they've got a better system than we have because they spend more than we have. We've been spending money endlessly on road schemes, which we have now shown definitively simply add to the traffic.
Every government is trying to steer towards a greener future. By slamming on the brakes, the Welsh Government says it can accelerate that change. Hywel Griffith, BBC News, Flintshire.
Well, it's clearly a very significant and potentially very controversial decision. Felicity Evans is with me here, who's a political editor at BBC Wales. Tell us a little more about this and the context in which it's happened.
Well, you're right on both counts, Huw. This really does mark the end of an era. It is a complete upheaval of traditional road building policy. Now, the Welsh Government says that it doesn't mean they are not going to build any new roads. But if you look at the criteria that a new project would have to satisfy, it's really hard to see any major new road getting the go-ahead. And you're right, that is very controversial. The Welsh Conservatives, for example, are saying they think it's going to damage the economy. But even some of Welsh Labour's own backbenchers have been critical today, I think fearing voter backlash in their own constituencies as local people see projects scrapped there. Remember, Welsh Labour has been in power here now for more than 2 decades, and the public transport system is poor in many places. Now, the Nationalist Party, Plaid Cymru, says that addressing that is key to giving drivers a viable alternative for travel. Now, ministers say that this will allow them to divert funding from roads into public transport. But at the moment, we've got a gap, haven't we? We've got driving being made increasingly unappealing, but we haven't got a good public transport alternative in many places. Now, the Deputy Minister, who we heard from there in Howell's report, says this is all about tackling climate change and it has to be done. And he has also raised the question of whether other governments across the UK will soon have to start thinking about these issues.
Felicity, many thanks once again. Felicity Evans there, BBC Wales political editor. Now, police investigating the killing of 16-year-old Brianna Jai have said that they are now considering whether it could have been a hate crime. The schoolgirl was found lying with stab wounds in a park in Warrington on Saturday. Police have been granted a 30-hour extension to question a boy and a girl, both aged 15, who have been arrested on suspicion of murder. Our North of England correspondent, Fiona Trott, is in Warrington to tell us more about what's been going on there today. Fiona?
Well, this is where Brianna was found in the middle of the afternoon on Saturday, found by passers-by, lying on the ground. She'd been stabbed several times. Now, Brianna was a transgender girl. People coming here today have told us that's why they've come to lay flowers here. And her death has touched people beyond Warrington. This evening, candlelit vigils are due to be held by members of the trans community and supporters in Liverpool and in Bristol. More are planned tomorrow in Manchester, Glasgow, Belfast and York. As for the investigation itself, Cheshire Police say all lines of inquiry are being explored, including whether this was a hate crime. And they've also been given more time to question 2 teenagers arrested on Sunday on suspicion of murder, a boy and a girl who are 15 years old. Brianna had a large following on social media. She was a popular teenager, seen by the growing number of floral tributes here. One of the cards reads, "Thank you for always being able to make me laugh and smile. You'll be missed so much." Her family say that her death has left a massive hole. They've described her as being beautiful, strong, one of a kind, and a fundraising page set up for them has raised over £75,000. So whether it's here in Warrington or beyond here in other parts of the UK, this teenager's death has affected people very deeply.
Fiona, many thanks again for the latest there in Warrington. Fiona Trott. Now, nearly a year after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, President Putin's regime is also waging a war against its critics at home. Laws have been passed to punish anyone expressing criticism of the so-called special military operation, and being found guilty carries the risk of a long prison sentence. Our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg has been to meet one young woman who was reported to the authorities by her fellow students.
20-year-old student Olesya Krivtsova has been missing a lot of classes lately. She's under house arrest, her every move monitored by this electronic tag. For social media posts critical of the war in Ukraine, Olesya faces up to 10 years in prison. She's been charged with discrediting the Russian army and justifying terrorism.
I never imagined you could get such a long prison sentence for posting on the internet. I've already been added to the official list of terrorists, the list that includes school shooters and groups like Islamic State. It's crazy.
Her Putin spider tattoo declares, "Big Brother is watching you." It turns out that Olesya's fellow students were watching her posts closely. Just before her arrest, Olesya had discovered this online chat. In it, students, some she knew, were discussing denouncing her to the authorities for her anti-war stance.
Some of them wanted to tell the security services or the police. Others were saying it's better just to discredit me. In the end, they decided that it was their duty as patriots to denounce me.
The only time Olesya is allowed out is to be in court. Her fashion statement, her protest against young Russians being punished for criticising the authorities. The judge ruled to keep her under house arrest. From the Russian people, the Russian authorities expect total, unflinching support for the offensive in Ukraine. If you don't support it, you're expected at the very least to stay silent. If you don't stay silent, well, there's a whole string of repressive laws now in Russia for punishing dissent. This opposition politician was convicted of spreading fake news about the army. Ilya Yashin was sent to prison for 8.5 years. For Vladimir Kara-Murza, the charge is treason. The Kremlin critic and anti-war activist faces 20 years in jail. On the streets of Arkhangelsk, it's not Big Brother watching you. He's a Russian soldier who was killed fighting in Ukraine. The patriotic messaging is persuasive. We found little sympathy here for people with anti-war views who are being prosecuted. Those people who are discrediting our army or spreading fakes, they're sick in the head, Konstantin says. They should be sent off to the front line as cannon fodder. As for Olesya, She says she dreams of a Russia that embraces freedom of speech, where Russians are not seen as criminals just for having a different opinion. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Arkhangelsk.
Now, in the past hour, it's been reported that a British man has died in Ukraine. His identity hasn't been confirmed, but the Foreign Office says it is supporting the man's family. And if it is confirmed, he'll be the 8th British man to die in Ukraine since the Russian invasion. Another of the day's stories, the Queen Consort is to wear what's being called a recycled crown for the King's coronation. It will not feature the very big diamond, which is being claimed by India. Queen Mary's crown has the controversial Koh-i-Noor diamond fitted in the front middle cross. Instead, Camilla will wear a modified version, reset with diamonds from the personal collection of the late Queen Elizabeth II. India is arguing that one of its 19th century rulers was in effect tricked into handing over the diamond during British colonial rule. Now, we're in Cardiff to mark a rather special birthday because 100 years ago this week, the BBC started broadcasting here in Wales. And in a country with very few national institutions, until relatively recently, BBC Wales has been a major presence, promoting a sense of Welsh identity, putting Welsh culture and sport on the map, certainly, with programmes in the 2 official languages of Wales, Welsh and English. All of this started, it's a great building to be in today, but all of this started back in 1923 with a few radio programmes. The big change happened when television came along.
In February, the BBC starts a new television service, BBC Wales.
The BBC has been a giant presence in Wales for decades, described as a cultural conveyor belt by one of its leaders. And by the 1960s, its gleaming new headquarters on the outskirts of Cardiff produced many hours of news, drama, education, music and sports programmes every week in 2 languages with some notable achievements.
If the BBC hadn't commissioned Under Milk Wood in 1954, Dylan Thomas would never have written it and we wouldn't have it.
BBC Cymru Wales, as it's now known, with a new home for the 21st century, has been there to mark some of the biggest events of the past century in Wales, some uplifting, some utterly tragic. The disaster at Aberfan in 1966, when a school was destroyed by a mountain of coal waste, claiming the lives of 116 children and 28 adults, was a searing moment for all of Wales, with the world looking on in sympathy.
The Prince of Wales tonight sent this message to the people of Aberfan. I send my deepest and heartfelt sympathy to all those who are bereaved and to those who are suffering.
A few years later, the Prince was being invested at Caernarfon Castle in a grand ceremony that wasn't without political controversy. It was the BBC's biggest outside broadcast since the coronation, and this one was in colour.
Mae'ch ynychiad wedi fy nghyffordd yn dywys.
But it's a fair bet that the BBC's biggest connection with the people of Wales over the years has been in sport, especially rugby. And who can forget the greatest try of all time with the greatest commentary by Welshman Cliff Morgan.
This is Huw Edwards, a dramatic start! What a score!
Over the years, the BBC's longest-running soap, Pobl y Cwm, has been a staple of the BBC's Welsh language supply to S4C.
Un teulu bach hapus man hyn, yn dyn ni Dani.
And its annual coverage of the National Eisteddfod is another major production effort on TV, radio and online. Not to mention other high-quality entertainment in both languages enjoyed by audiences worldwide.
Someone tell me what the hell is going on here?
At a time of huge competition in the creative sector, we are still attracting around about 92% of the people of Wales to the BBC every week. But our role in that is to provide unique, distinctive and relevant content for the people of Wales, about Wales, in both English and Welsh.
These days, with the law-making Senedd in Cardiff Bay, it is a very different Wales and a rather different BBC Wales to that of 25 years ago. Who could have predicted these scenes and that result? 0.3% nationwide in Wales of a victory for the Yes campaign, everything turning on Carmarthenshire. What did they say? I think somebody once said nothing has changed. I wish that were true. But I have to say, on a personal note, it's great to be in this modern broadcast centre in the heart of the Welsh capital, bringing you the news about Wales, the UK and the world. It's come on a long way in the last century. Right, the time is 29 minutes past 6. We're going to join Matt, who's waiting patiently with the weather. Hi, Matt.
Hi there, Huw. Lovely day for you there in Cardiff. 12 degrees the high, but it's actually in West Wales where we saw the highest of the temperatures in the UK today. In the sunshine, we got above 16 Celsius, should be around 8. Contrast that, though, with parts of Lincolnshire. The fog really just did not want to shift, just 4 degrees right the way through into the afternoon. Both, though, dry, and that's quite a crucial thing at the moment. After that thoroughly wet start to the year, there are some parts of England who have barely had a drop in the past month, but it will change. Here's an area of cloud out in the Atlantic at the moment. That is pushing towards us. We just need to break through the block with this area of cloud, which tonight will edge its way into parts of Northern Ireland and far west of Scotland to bring some outbreaks of rain and a strengthening wind. Away from that, you stay dry. Mist and fog could again be an issue, but this time across eastern parts of England, and again a frost around. A fairly light frost, but a frost nonetheless across parts of England, Wales and eastern Scotland. Where we start tomorrow, lots of sunshine around. Fog again taking a while to shift, but should clear quicker. More of a breeze tomorrow. Wet start in Northern Ireland, brightening up, more cloud and rain later. Rain spreads across Scotland during the morning. Sunshine and showers for the afternoon, and Wales and western parts of England will see some rain during the middle part of the day, arriving in the Midlands later on. But it will fizzle a little bit. East Anglia and South East staying dry. Mildest here tomorrow, 14-15 degrees. Touch cooler than today elsewhere, but still above average. And then into tomorrow night. Rain for a time across East Anglia and South East, but here we go. More substantial and widespread rain across England and Wales. Not seen that for a long time. Rainfall amounts will vary. Lots of mist and low cloud for Thursday. It's going to be quite a grey and murky day, particularly around hills and coast. Brighter further north, particularly for northern Scotland, and another mild day. But as we go through into Thursday night and Friday, deep air of low pressure will spread its way across from the north, and that will bring a pretty windy end to the week, especially in the north. That's how it's looking. Huw.
Matt, thank you very much once again. That is BBC News at 6 from Cardiff. We'll be back with BBC News at 10. But now it's all of our colleagues on BBC One in the nations and regions ready with the news where you are. But for now, thanks for watching and bye.
Hi there, good evening. Welcome